everyone. Tonight I'm sharing a creepy story that happened while I was working nights at a convenience store. Please hit the subscribe button and let us know your country and time while you comment. With that, do the same and stay relaxed, and I shall tell my tale. The area where I grew up was extremely quiet. Literally everyone was acquainted with this, to a point where everyone was practically related. The Green family. Our neighbors had the big house, my family lived in a small one. The Collins were the richest. Subsequently, their garden was beautifully designed. Mr. Collins was very isolated. He owned an immensely black car. He washed it every single weekend. The question of why it was so extraordinary to him arose in me. On the other hand, Mrs. Collins was an absolutely different person. She was approachable and smiling at me. She told me about school and gave me some of her homemade cookies. I waved back to her. Life there often left me the feeling of being lonely. It was like I was lost. They had been around for years. My memory still caught the visual of the day when the police showed up. The essence was already felt like it was trouble. From the first time Mrs. Collins arrived over there, she was calling me to looking after their sick son. I had the pleasure at times to say to him, "Be still." Mr. Collins was lucky enough to get him a job which can be done at home. Still, the most prominent lover was Stacy. It was fantastic. Mrs. Bone has just died at the hospital. The driveway of the house had almost become unrecognizable due to the dirt growth as well as the untidiness of the garden. However, the situation changed dramatically after one particular evening. We were in the middle of dining when a loud noise suddenly came from the Collins house. My father went to see with the lights on and told us to stay indoors. At the glance, I had seen the image of the two persons standing at the door. Then, amazingly, he came back. But his face had all the signs of his being anxious due to what he had smelt or seen outside the house. The main room of the house was cast into a gloomy, silhouetted land. Thus, Mr. Collins was in the kitchen. There was a boiling pot with some liquid on the stove. Meanwhile, a gun was lying on the counter. My dad looked shocked, and for the life of him, he couldn't explain what exactly it was. During the following night, the stories about the Collins family mutated into the whisperings carried around the town and the withdrawings. That man and his closed doors that way gave the impression that he had something to hide. Everybody around here was vociferous galore. Most persons accused him of being the reason behind the difficult situation of his mother and sister. None of you should throw the first stone at me because you all don't know what the true actuality was. Personally, if I would try to find out my true feelings, they wouldn't let me be anything, but this was just a phantom of my imagination, was the aware state of his thoughts. My fears would rush back to my mind at night. Formerly, I used to ponder over that building not far from my house. Why people there were getting so sad because of Mrs. Collins, they might not even be aware of her death. Mr. Collins, that noisy ambulance at garage, still frightens me. He was struck dumb when the old man applied a rap to the door. The night was over me with shadows, which I even didn't figure out an answer to. I was putting on airs, prancing around, even assimilation of other ethnic groups is possible through food. I mean, my dad gave me the keys when he took a break from his job 2 months earlier, but yep, that's okay. It just occurred to me that it is Sunday. Normally, I go the way where we send our drivers to deliver food, but it appeared that I began from a different spot, and at once, I was kind of confused by the changed environment. The shadowy passages felt like a twisted way, where scary dark corridors were behind every corner. The fading street lamps added to the tension as I was driving through streets that looked nothing like the map shown on my GPS. The more I went deeper, the bigger the craze got. I had to deliver the order, no matter the type of pain I was experiencing. After what it seemed like an eon, I eventually arrived at the address. It was an old, narrow house at the end of a dead-end road. The entrance was covered with overgrown grass and weeds. The tree branches blocked the walkway. The little painted house looked haunted. The package, however, had to be delivered. I went to the trunk of my car, and there were the crushed stones all the way to the house. I had thought of going back. Suddenly, a thought appeared on my mind. Maybe people who are in this house are hungry. Then I, finally, got out of the house with a package and started walking towards the house, which I had always wished for. It was then that I heard a sound like dragging leaves over the ground. and I turned outside, I noticed shadows emerging from the distance of streets and corners skimming between houses and corners. As they moved closer, my heart began to beat fast in my chest, with the sound of every beat vibrating in my ears. At that moment, I noted that one had stepped into the light of the porch. Next, his face, which was obscured under a white mask, was revealed void of facial features. The rest of the masked people also put on the same masks, which did not have any facial expression. I was cornered by them on the porch and felt tightly squeezed against the railing. In fright, my lungs wanted to breathe, but at first, I was so lost as one of the strangers. I heard a loud sound that resembled dragging leaves over the ground, and I looked out to see people appearing from the darkness between the houses and the corners. A lot of them came even closer, at which point my heart throbbed loudly in my chest. I was scared and didn't know how to escape the noise. I then realized later that only one of them had stepped into the light of the porch. His face was concealed in a white mask without any facial features. The others followed suit, putting on masks without any expressions, surrounding me, getting closer to me from all sides, where in the end, my back was pressing against the railing of the porch. The air came in gasps as I nearly stopped breathing when I opened the door. My heart was pounding before I saw the content, and it was the cold night that even made the situation worse. Hoping for a reply, I yelled out in a state of fear. The universe manifested itself much less strongly than before when the first sound was strange and I heard it. Only the silent road in front of me and no one else. The street was full of cars and people 2 hours before that. Suddenly, it was only I who occupied that place. She was this woman who walked by and then stopped to look at me again and again. How long has it been? She was standing in shadows on the road. Her gaze was so weird. She probably thought I was mad for being out again after I'd been so lucky, but that was about to change. Too many things were going on within the same short period, which made me worried. I could not see a single one of them either. My car was safe, no damage. How could that be? I had been scooped of security. Arsco, a human being robbed of safety, I accelerated the car, and the twisted roads made me lose my way as I was doing circles over and over again, until I finally got the right way. It occurred to me that it might be the best to avoid thinking about those cold hands that pulled me out of the light. The fear was a constant thing. It was in front of me the whole time, though I could barely see it because it was almost transparent until the next story was added and gotten on the way to this life with the repetition of infinite nightmare. Those who subscribe to the channel for the first time, and remember to tap the bell icon for upcoming horror stories. Please help us by clicking on this link and then forwarding this dreadful story to all family and friends. Earning thanks. There was nothing but silence in the hospital at night. There were times when the hospital floor was so quiet that I felt like the shift's end couldn't come soon enough. There was an appearance of the dull, light white walls barely audible, buzzing from fluorescent bulbs together with some distant beeping machines, which gave an odd sense of reality. I sneaked to the office, my fellow workers' basement, where we efficiently and professionally show them around the week before the date. The office was at the morgue, a place I did not like. It was a little past midnight. That's why I was sitting in the office with some of the other workers. We were just chatting and laughing while seeing the time go by as we were waiting for the end of our shifts. The air tasted strongly of disinfectant and made everything smell like that in the office. Only sounds were those that we heard from the barely speaking lights and faint humming of air conditioning, sounded up from the feet that were heard last, along with the slow steps of doctors or nurses. The noise made us jump. We gazed at the door as a man entered it immediately. I saw a man who was fixing our pickup with a wrench. He was scared to death, and his eyes were open wide. He was there, calmly working for a bit. Then he looked at us, and he appeared to be sick. He looked really old, trying to fit into a contemporary time. His clothes were freshly washed, but they were out of date. He made me feel very awkward. They wrapped each other and started talking. One of them pointed at the guy by the truck. He was the one transporting the corpse, they said. Not only that, but the question is why here? He doesn't belong here. Even though I was not entirely chill, I could not ignore his weird behavior, and there was a nagging feeling that didn't let me feel comfortable. I regretted looking him in the eye. It was interesting how he just looked at us with no response, rather than replying to us with his name or the reason why he was there. The perception that expunges itself in my disposition in relation to the identity of the man is something that I do not have any clue about, whether it's the fiercest kind or the one who is somewhat childlike. But the most disheartening and unexpected thing happened when he said that people were going to die there soon. It seemed that somebody was trying to frighten us. Startled, both of us gasped at this unbelievable claim from a man who seemed as unsure as we did. I faced an extreme fear when I first stepped into the hospital dead room, because I always had resisted at least 10 very painful and stressful blood transfusions. Your browser does not support the video tag. The world seemed to be paused for us and waited until we appeared, and then carry out the invasion into the specter-like place, should we? I began to doubt about it, but yet there was a period when silence came upon us, up to the point where he finally spoke, sharing how one can feel so lonely in the morgue at night, and at the same time wondering why the place is becoming a scared one. This kind of occurrence manifests itself vividly in some horror movies that have a detrimental effect on my sleep pattern, yet make things worse for the state of mind that I had before. The man was acting in an unusual way. He tried to examine me now and then, thought a lot, led us to the place, and then went away with a lot of hesitation. We really couldn't figure out what motivated all this. My head was spinning too. I was very lucky that the whole situation with the spectral morgue abated so hastily. I wondered whether we should inform the security. I inquired about it from another person working there. Initially, I thought it was good to report it, and he consented. We together decided that the best way was to inform security. There were only a few lights poorly illuminating the space, which resulted in the place being quite scary. The nature of the shadows on the wall was somewhat eerie. When we finally found the guard, he was there with him. We educated him on the situation with the trespasser. When we mentioned the man to him, he obviously looked very puzzled. Yes, I said to him. My stomach was tied in knots with fear. Then the guard answered negatively. That policeman knows this man well. He had already seen this man on many occasions. But every time we miss him, this person had a very bad idea, the guard said. Our guard made so many commitments to us, but I could not stop worrying. This gave me an idea that was so scary that I thought dead people from their beds were returning to their normal life. While I was leaving the basement office, I realized something very terrible had happened. The hospital was very gloomy and unsafe. It was home to spooky things that people did. I always kept seeing the man with the pale face and eyes that were full of horror. His cry seemed to echo in my ear. With the dead people at my job, I thought about some situations. It's like a movie that I already saw, over and over again playing in my head. I got home, but my heart was not at peace. I felt a shadow was following me. I remembered everything else but not the man we had met that time. The sinister feeling reminded me of the fragile line between life and death. One day, when I was 13, I went with my father to the pine forests to accompany him hunting. This time, the woods were denser and darker, with trees so close they enfolded us. The atmosphere was stifling. We were right at the edge of the forest, just a little before sunrise. Dad explained to me that animals would be more frightened at the night, while mentioning that hunting was best to be done at night. I felt safe that I'd be with him, so I was not much worried. After the sun had sunk, the night enveloped us. At night in the woods, shadows kept moving. We strolled further, and the leaves rustled under our boots. Dad had a real gun, whereas mine was more like a toy, and it had been my birthday gift until now. I had it close to me and felt its chill against my chest. Moonlight could barely make through the dense trees, therefore we had to turn on the lights to make a way to ourselves. Afterward, we put off the lights to be able to hear better. My father was a real expert in tracking down animals' footprints, but that night there was nothing but leaves rustling gently and branches snapping calmly. My legs were so exhausted that I had to rest after walking for an hour. When I took a log and sat down in an open area where there was silence and peace, I almost got scared of the quiet. My heartbeat was so loud that Dad's whispering, although gentle, sounded like a shout. This incident took place at night, however. I felt like I was the only occupant of the whole darkness. Suddenly, a sound emerged out of thin air, much like the growling of a mountain-sized beast stalking the woods from a secret hideout. I turned around to look at Dad. who seemed to be pale and shocked. His finger directed me to join him as if he was shooting because that growl came again louder, shaking all trees around. I felt horrified. The sound had an extremely lurid effect on me. Dad and I went out for the night in the woods. Because I was so frightened, I tightly held onto the gun. All of a sudden, I saw a creature on the hill. It had eyes that were shining but was not a type of animal that we would recognize. It looked huge and frightening. The beast moved slowly towards us with sharp white teeth shining in the flashlight's beam. Dad asked me to still. I felt so weak that I couldn't even stand. The monster growled deeply. Dad aimed his gun, yet he couldn't shoot so closely to the animal. The creature would disappear in the dark and reappear with its eyes burning in our direction. My heart raced. I felt like it would explode through my chest. There was only blackness that hid the dangerous beast. It made such a noise that the trees vibrated. Dad all of a sudden pulled me by the arm, and we just ran away without thinking. I could hear his footsteps running along behind me. The growls could be heard over the far-off ringing of our shoes as we ran through the misty forest. The branches and leaves scratched my hands and face. I was doing the impossible by breathing fire and my legs felt weak. I didn't even think about stopping. Closer to the night, he and she dashed deep into the forest. The core idea was that he simply wished to escape the monster. We actually covered too much ground and, in consequence, we got lost. The well-known pathways became a thing of history, while all we could see were trees and shadows. The moon did not support us either. We, at an excessive pace, went around trees. The path choice did not matter to us. We just wanted to run away from the monster. We immediately switched directions, and this only served to complicate things more. My heart was almost taking off, and I could hardly hold my weight. Adamu is Samu father Dean trees. Love the relationship of children to the gamma toys that made the noise but without the excessive ease. Which was the scariest one, was the challenge. Oi, we once that one key his voice leaves barely whispered. It was first I would have quite because I didn't know where to go. We were lost in the pine barrens, and that creature was still out there watching us. We walked in the woods for a long time. We were trying to find our way back to the truck. Every sound was making me jump. Every shadow looked like the creature, my flashlight. As the light layers of flipping Mew played the game with the prospect of Sidon standing in darkness, my vast traveler shafted the truth. There was no need to be mistaken about choosing the correct path, as it was a simple one-point entry or exit. Yes, but my parents told me that it was a narrow, tangled one. Eric Young, Barger was it too, so I really was the one. My smile was as wide as the bee. The first feeling flew from me into it. When we reached the truck where we had come from to our back was the very, very message of the truck. The moment we got to the truck, I saw the last crows leaving my face, and quickly ran to the right side. My palms were still shaking, and my father, a robotic-like, started the car whoosh, and we were gone with the family. Upon the sight of the strange creature, we didn't say a word until we arrived at our house. It was kind of weird, so I didn't even try. I was exhausted and felt frustrated about the pines and woods. I was quite sure that neither one of us was injured, but I was never going hunting in those woods. At that time, I took the chance to work quietly at a gas station, since there were not so many cars passing by. At 2:30 in the morning, I witnessed the same scene I had seen the night before. I was busy handling the cash register instead of serving customers when I noticed that it was almost time to shut down the equipment. The exterior lights showed long shadows over the parking lot, and the only sound that was present was the flimsy and exhausted spark of age electricity. My last cashier closure, my manager would always make sure to remind me to be careful noticing anyone entering the store after hours. This threat I always brushed off as overdramatic until it actually happened one of those nights. I had almost finished counting the money when I heard the thud of the front door hitting the nearby wall and saw it swing upward. The noise was so loud that I got up out of my seat. An insane-looking man burst in and pulled me down to the ground. The man was unpleasant and looked as if he hadn't had a bath in days. The grime on him was there for months. He only studied my face. He did not speak. The only thing that interested him was my money. I was panic-stricken. Everything around me ceased to function, but suddenly he pounced on me and seized my cash from my hands. The next thing I knew was that he had the money and he was already running towards the exit. I jumped out from behind the counter and ran after him. I screamed, "Stop!" It was as if an immense adrenaline rush was the only sensation that I was able to feel. Despite the fact that he was running clumsily, being wobbly gave the impression he was drunk. Lastly, he terminated running in the parking lot. The conclusion I arrived at is that he took narcotics. While he was running away from the police, I noticed some of my own money hanging from his pocket. How I told the officers in a breathless voice about what I saw. There was a man that did some cash stuffing in his coat, remember? They said he was a homeless drug addict. The money was stolen by him because he desperately wanted to buy drugs. Tero lise, do kam awo, but ho felt bad for ham. How well areli evid, ta temo ardeal was over. Rianhuli, teo onfermed me thought it wa go thing, solid. Teu dead, tastasol, hare tan te shamani that unsluded te poluse. Trulu believed tat, at sold have yended warsalu. Efter Theo left, I went bask to the gastat non. Te noit was still realu keet buthen, but at dad not fail the same. Usat watling for anatherbad tongue to haran, but everything wa all rat tol mushuft evlinda hedend all losked tedaro. Asar trusk astone, well when makung a hard 10 degreea. Nusar was ulharung of a wet road. Atzared disrar out of all of ue at f erst. Our driver Devon sold not get over at. Waisred asrolero. De tere ekialid a veramid. De sar enta te trea. Mitanus asreamid. After that istamo, ve alraged out. By issued from Hiaven. Te karwa totally destroyed. Te roll of fogging continued. Seth news fasiwa alwath he and blow drop ing on her no way. Seth was on muside. I felt so far awau. Marsalu. Avas tankang abot vat atotalu and moserable tongue a holdby. Night road filled with darkness and loneliness. Dia horror of the urge on teroad. Ti arusad budoing tem toteroad. Right now I have the pleasure of sleeping out in the open under the stars, tell some scary stories, and roast marshmallows next to the campfire. I was with Joel, Megan, and Bridget. The last semester in college was a drag. All the students were looking forward to getting away from academics for a while. Ahead of me was only an echo converging into the voice of the beings asking if we were okay. Bethany gave her nod with words that I didn't believe, but she was looking at the back in search of the strange car. Looking back at that old car, feeling the grip of the seatbelt, I saw the little time I had left still showing with fast blinking, and I was still trying to manage it. I was in front as passing the head hairstyle fastened at the end. Devon was the reason Bethany and Seth were sat at the back of the car despite the film's been unbearable. Of course, I couldn't miss the embarrassment on my friends' faces. They were almost white and smeared with some blood, and because of that alone, I was nearly sick. We are not out of the game, are we? Bethany gazed at me in such horror, and her face begged me to say something while I stared at the rays of moonlight falling on the top of the car. Quite surely I was at the point, only when I did not want to touch the thing, for I thought this was one of the nightmares I had before. I grappled for an explanation to satisfy the curiosity in my head, clipping metallic theon, the driver's part which I couldn't reach at the time. But, to my disappointment, I noticed the wet sand was coming down through my hand. Damn it. Even immortals die, don't they? I thought so. It must be the only thing that occurred to me. The thought that we were dead drove me crazy, but why I couldn't feel any discomfort. Maybe we were like spirit souls, bodies just being the emptiness inside. We were done because without reason we destroyed the spirit rotary. Out in the open countryside, under the dry moon and the aroma of the grass in the fields. Total silence. It looks like I have been thrown off my track in the desert. The only sound source was Devon, as he was playing the background music. His friends who behaved as if they were in a horror movie. In Horror of One Night, the sounds hounded us. The darkness was composed of the most bizarre productions of our imagination. We had to find some way out to attract attention to the scripts we worked on. We were almost invisible to the man who was surrounding us from all sides. The next thing I knew, I was the physician who was responsible for treating them. At one point, I was again entangled in the darkness. However, I had to move forward. If I were to say something about 7 o'clock last night, then it is morning now. Raising my eyes for the first time, and I saw that it was the same time that Devin was lying flat next to me in his bed, and that was the only way to feel like you cannot tell anyone else how it felt. I felt that my entire body had been destroyed to the level that my head was not so much up top, I was simply thinking again of being back there. The only thing I could perceive was the, zero bright light that was near me for the first time that happened. I was pulled out of the darkness and into the light, and I felt like I became a complete different person with a new life. I think I heard the question which Bethany was asking from where she was standing that was not at a great distance from. Paul Anderson declared, "I don't want any more incidents in this ward." The doctor said to me that he was giving every patient a pill at noon, It didn't surprise me because I was sure we were going to find ourselves in the dark again. All of a sudden, that scene which I had gone through in my near-death experience was back to me in just a moment. I was in such a mess at that moment, but I could see everything for some mysterious reason. The list of things I was supposed to do was being read to me out there in the dark. All the mistakes similar to ones I had made before, and there wasn't any doubt that it was because of this, nor was I required to be told again. There were times that things were not going to happen. Pen ege.ny just happened without me .even.knowing.it, but later on at some points. Seth entered the room and we suddenly said, "Surprise!" at him. He caught my arm and squeezed it. The nurse came to examine me and then smiled. She told me, "You were in a car crash, but don't worry, you are getting better now." I was so surprised. She informed me that I was under a general anesthetic for several days. Our crashed car just came flashing to my mind. The idea of being dead was a bit terrifying to me. When she noticed my tears, she patted my arm. I noticed that Bethany was at my side, and again she smiled at me. Seth was pale, but now he has no longer so. It's still unbelievable that we all managed to survive after that accident. Everything seemed so unreal. The nurse calmed me through her gentle touch. Nevertheless, terrifying memories of the accident came back suddenly into my mind. It was really a horrible nightmare. Thank heavens we got through it. Long day at work made me want to go home only. I was too hot. I had been sweating all the time. The night was still damp outside. Yet, due to the hot weather, I was still drenched. I had even turned off the cooling system long ago, but still I felt extremely thirsty. I hadn't eaten or drunk anything for a few hours, and a coin fell on my throat, and the whole day's money was disgustingly cardboard. So I was asking myself if the hunger would reach me in all these normal ways, my head, although I once again checked if there were not any lies as indicated in the ticket, and that I was the one to normally carelessly look outside of, but suddenly an empty impression that there was no one inside or outside. Alice in Wonderland, I drove darkly. The world to this place had never been frequented before, but parked near the damaged house in the front yard inspected. Finally went into the kitchen, causing myself inside the thoughts contained in my head. A pure plea for pizza, but which I thought could not be thus. Only God he had. Also, it was locked as well through the tongue. My mouth had dried out, followed by continuous thirst against watery feeling. My greatest need also exited, but thus, bathroom, I confirmed copiously that, according to what was on record being briefed though dark, I felt as if I was in a place that time forgot. It was so quiet, there was no bird song, no cricket sounds, even the waves of the sea were not there. Absolute silence reigned over the vicinity. I rung the doorbell. It sounded, however, the silence around did not allow this bell to burst out. I remained silent as I felt the heat of the sun's small rays on my neck. The phone rang, and the voice on the other side was in a state of excitement. She informed me she was on her way. The condition was abnormal, as I felt something was wrong, although I have told her that I would wait. Nevertheless, I had been desperate to go to the bathroom, but since there was no one there was also no animal or man. The place was quiet, and suddenly I felt my skin crawl. When I was in urgent need to pee, I quickly stepped behind a big bush in front of an old haunted house. It was well covered with dark leaves, and I assumed I was all alone. Just as I was getting comfortable, I heard a delicate sound from the front of me. I raised my head and saw a man peeping out of the bush. Without my saying anything, he jumped out and disappeared into the darkness. I was glued to the spot. Who was he? Why was he there? I discovered a bag that had been left there by him. Inside were duct tape, a knife, and rope. My heartbeat skyrocketed. This was terrifying. He wasn't just a man looking for a hiding place. He was up to mischief. I quickly made a call using my mobile device. The operator of 911 was dialed quickly down by me. I provided her with all the necessary information, such as the man, the bag, and the homecoming female. I was promised that the police were on their way to help me out. Nevertheless, it felt as if it took forever as I waited for the sirens to come. I was frantically panicking, so I stood on the porch waiting anxiously. I was looking over my eyes for the man in the shadows. The next moment, out of the blue, I saw a woman walking fastly and constantly looking over her shoulders to make sure no one followed her. It turned out that she was the person whom I had pursued earlier, and the sight of panic was written all over her face. She told me that her ex was following her and that he is dangerous. I quickly grabbed her arm and, leading her to my car, told her to get in. We would wait for the police there. Tears were running down her cheeks as she got in. I locked the doors and waited nervously on the dark street for something to happen. As we were waiting, time was passing by slowly. Then all of a sudden, I heard the cars approaching. I told them what had happened, but the cops quickly looked around the place and they could not find anyone. The only thing there was the bag which I left behind. They were in charge of the woman's case now and promised to go all out to find her ex. The members of the police force carried her off, but their faces showed the relief of having successfully dealt with the dangerous situation. I am still scared to death. As I was driving home, the thought of that man lurking in the bushes stayed with me. What if I had not found that woman? It was oddly disheartening. I felt as if someone was close to something terrible. I got goosebumps when I remembered that night when shadows were dancing and heat was stifling. Reluctantly, I went on an expedition to a dilapidated house with my friend Kevin. The legend was that people said that it was creepy, but we just thought we could have some fun. However, when we went there, we were quite glaringly aware of the existence of some evil energy around the place. The house was very old, scary, and had a cover of vines. Whilst Kevin strolled brazenly all over the place, I was white-knuckled and beside myself. So I decided to trailblaze behind him. When the door opened with a creak, the house was dark and filled with the smell of decay. There was old furniture all over the place. It seemed as though nature had revenged itself. Kevin and I went through the dusty rooms and saw worn wallpaper on the walls. I felt weird, but Kevin appeared like he didn't have any fear at all. We discovered a narrow staircase. He proposed going upstairs. I got a strange feeling. However, he initiated his ascent. The stairs were loud and creaky. I came behind him with a tight grip on the railing. There was less light than there were up, as there were broken glasses or were boarded up windows. We walked down a dark corridor. The outside was a little cold and it had a nasty smell. I was trying to tell Kevin to leave. Our every movement was snatched by a guttural sound that suddenly came forward. The color of Kevin's face turned to a snow white. It made my blood run cold and I froze on the spot. We heard a noise quite different from an animal growl. It was something even more terrifying. Kevin, who was a persistent boy, was walking out of the room even before we had been discussing it. That was my cue to go. He opened the door. The growl grew louder and my heart pounded. After all, I was unable to flee. The room was dark, however. I could make out a creature with a shaking arm and piercing eyes. It growled and spoke, "Go or you'll be left in the middle of nowhere." Kevin and I decided to take the risk and continued our journey down the corridor. The building felt like it was alive. The walls groaned and the floors creaked. A handler was now in sight and it ran really fast as if to say to us, "Run away." We fumbled as we ran downstairs and banged the windows, but still found our way outside the door. The air seemed heavier as it appeared to be trying to keep us in, but we didn't give up. Having passed through the gate, which was in ruins, without looking back, we were finally allowed us to breathe calmly. Our heartbeat is now slower. A field was where we were standing, looking at the house that was quite far. It had a dark-tinted Glomu Mustasal Loak. Although we were no longer kids, we could still see the scary truth. We promised each other never to talk about the incident anymore, but I was still haunted by the memory. I felt like something very strong was signaling to me that we were in a dangerous situation. We had to get ourselves out of there before it was too late. A mysterious voice continued, warning us, "Leave or regrettably you will remain forever." In the morning light, we were able to detect that something very wicked was lurking within the building. I remember my word of honor that I would not be brave enough to climb the hill to the house or else get in close proximity to the house. Aren't these the thoughts that came to my mind? It frightened me so much that I had to hurry away to safety, so I thanked God we did escape. However, there might be others who are not as lucky that way, and it makes me shiver with fear. I'd rather give a wide berth to that house now. The truth is, I may never think of going to that place again either. The importance of giving a warning and then leaving the spot right away may sometimes be good daily practice.